The Bitcoin halving is nearly 2 weeks away, due to occur on the 20th of April. This is that period where most had anticipated huge skyrocketing prices for Bitcoin, potentially hitting $100,000 before the halving, $200,000 before the halving. This is the type of crap that we were listening to for the last several months as Bitcoin skyrocketed to new all-time highs. But what happens every single time at the halving, and what can we do to anticipate what comes next? This is what I want to dive into in today's video, showing you the data and the charts because it's your home of macro cycle analysis, covering Bitcoin, cryptos, stock markets, and of course the real estate cycle. We're full-time investors here, so we look at this stuff full-time and deliver you our reports every single day here on the channel. So make sure you hit that like button. It pumps up the channel so more people can understand what is going on out in the markets. And of course, subscribe if you haven't already. Guys, we do have a special on TIA Premium starting today, flash sale, 2 days only. Link in the top of the video description if you want to be notified about that. Apart from that, let's move on with the details of Bitcoin and of course the traditional markets as well. We want to get a reading of what's going on out in the rest of the financial landscape. Quick headlines here about ETFs. Cathie Wood's ARK Bitcoin ETF has recorded $87 million outflow, surpassing Grayscale's Bitcoin ETF. I have a smile on my face about this because that was only a few weeks ago that Cathie Wood decided to change her targets. She was talking about $1 million Bitcoin before at 2030, and now she changed it to before 2030. Guess when she changed it? She changed it at the peak, the 9th thereabouts of March. You had a few days to go until you got to that exact peak, but the funny thing here is that you will always see big faces or big heads in the space telling you the best bullish targets that you can possibly hope for near the peaks. These are fantastic signals to hold on to and to understand how they work in the markets. And the same sort of thing happens at the lows. We had that FTX collapse, which called almost the exact bottom of Bitcoin to almost the exact day. That's the sort of stuff that we're going to continue to follow up on as the cycle progresses. And you may have noticed yourself around the peaks of March that you had maybe your friends and family, co-workers coming to you, asking you about crypto and Bitcoin at that time. And that was a pretty good signal around the peak. Now, I don't claim to be calling tops or bottoms. I cannot call exact tops or exact bottoms, but we can get relatively close to the areas around where that price could be topping or could be bottoming. There's a lot of signals that come up around that time, and you'll start to notice them the longer that you are in the game. And for me, I'm bringing this up because Cathie Wood is going to be one of those faces that comes back again towards the peak to let us know that Bitcoin is now going to hit $1 million before her 2030 target and possibly before 2026 or something crazy like that. Sometimes this ruffles some feathers, but if you're not one of those people that get easily triggered, I highly suggest you put this into your toolbox of trading accessories and trading tools so that you can keep track of when these signals occur. Now, I keep track of the ETF inflows and outflows just to give us an understanding of what's going on in the news and the headlines, because again, I believe this is going to get really pumped up. The prices are obviously going to go up for Bitcoin, but the narrative of the ETF is probably going to get hotter towards the next peak yet again. Now, we can look back to the days around the peak. This is just the pure data, not my opinion. 12th of March, the 11th of March, the 13th, 11th, basically 11th, 12th, 13th, and then into your peak there on the 14th of March. That was the exact peak so far. Sure, we're only 10% off that top at the moment, but to understand that you'll see a lot of this news, very, very bullish news, that was the biggest purchase of Bitcoin at the peak. Now, I say that very slowly so that we can understand what we might see at the next time. I'm extremely bullish on the markets. I think we have further to go to the upside, maybe into our wave 5, our last really big push to the upside, but there are going to be corrections along the way. So keep that in the back of your mind. We'll continue to follow up with these types of data points because they are very good news headlines. The biggest inflows that we've ever seen, basically the day before the peak. And when you look at it in terms of the top, it was almost to the exact dollar about around that peak. On the flip side of the bullish news, you've got the bearish news. And what we saw recently was Fed moves Bitcoin from seized Silk Road wallet holding $2 billion in funds. This sort of scared the market yesterday. We saw a flash crash on Bitcoin of about 6% there. Essentially, if you're new to the game, it's probably a bit difficult to understand that this is going to take time to sift through the system. It's not likely that you would see $2 billion jump onto the exchange and then get sold on that same day. This type of news has been around forever. We've heard about Silk Road now for the last 10 years. This event happened in roughly 2013, 2014, I think was the first crash. I got into Bitcoin early 2017, and I've been hearing about this thing for the last 7 years. We've seen 2 bull markets since then, and we're now into our 3rd bull market. So if you hear more about Silk Road, eventually they're going to sell the coins. Eventually they're going to send the coins to whoever owns them, but it depends on where we are in the cycle. We're currently in a macro bull market. Despite what some of the comments think about my position on the market, we're in a macro bull market, and bad news, it doesn't necessarily do too much to the price. In a bear market, bad news will affect the price far more substantially. That's how you know you're in a bull market or a bear market. We get good news in a bear market, that's not going to do too much to the price. The price is probably going to keep going down eventually. You get good news in a bull market, you're going to keep seeing the price increase. That's a pretty big difference when you look at it from a fundamental point of view with news headlines. That's typically how you can tell we are in a bull market. And we've used this along the course of the last several years on the channel, especially around that FTX low and then also the banking crisis low of March 2023. Huge bad news, prices were higher. It's a pretty good signal there, which now leads us over to Bitcoin and some of the lies around the halving, what happens next, of course, with the Bitcoin price and what goes on from here in terms of the timing until we can get back to new fresh highs. So where do we currently sit? We are about 2 weeks out. As we showed there, it's about 16 days from the halving. That leaves obviously 2 weeks. Well, what has happened in the past? And I've got a couple of notes here as well, so we can figure out what potentially is happening at this point in time. The previous halving, we're going to look back at 2020. 2020 saw a peak at the halving week, and then there was about 13 weeks sideways. So 3 months sideways. What I've got here, just looking at a couple of data points, it's always a bit of an issue when you've only got so few data points. But I like to look at it in context of the cycle itself and the pattern that the market is doing. So weekly swing, hold, or break. So we want to understand now, are we going to see a significant correction? Maybe something lighter here, 25, 30-ish% that people aren't ready for? Or are we going to see a grind sideways? Of course, we only have a few of these data points, 2020, 2016, 2012. What happened in 2020? Now, there was the COVID correction, the COVID crash, the pandemic crash. That happened in February to March of 2020. For Bitcoin, it dropped 63%. The beauty about that is it took out every single weekend in a flash. That's the best part about these extreme, sometimes black swan, but sometimes very significant events that happen all at once. They just take out all of the people who want to sell, and it basically shows you the extreme strength of the market. Same sort of thing that happened with the banking crisis low in March 2023. We had the COVID crash in March 2020. That price was higher than the Bitcoin cycle low. So it's showing you there is a lot of strength. A lot of people bought up very cheap Bitcoin at that time. So they didn't leave too much of a crash to happen around the halving. The most that the correction saw was about 14% from the swing top to the swing bottom. But if it was in that same week itself, it was about 19. So call it 20% correction there after such an extreme correction that only happened a few weeks earlier. So the weekly swings held up, and there was already a major correction that occurred very recently. So I'm using these as rough guidelines to understand what might happen next for Bitcoin. Do we see a more substantial correction here for the halving period coming into the halving, or might we see a bit more of a grind here, maybe a 20% from top to bottom type of correction? Let's go back to 2016. You got the halving here in June. So we've got those couple of guidelines there looking at the swings. The swing didn't break leading into the halving, it broke after the halving, but there was a reasonable correction here the day before, or the week before, sorry, almost 30% the week before the halving. Now, there was another quick flush out here in August of 2016 from the top to the low, about 38%. So we'll use these numbers in a moment. But the thing to note with this is it was a quick flush, and I've got the horizontal support line there, that the prices did not close under that area. So maybe you might get something close to that in the future, but essentially what we're looking at here is even though there was a quick flush, it came straight back up, it held the line, put in a higher low, which is a sign of strength, and then pushed to higher prices. Note at this time, this is going over the course of 2 to 3 months, and you see the volatility drop right off. The price ranges are very, very small. So that means a lot of people left the market at this time. Most were getting very bored. And I suspect something similar like that will happen if we're to get some sort of correction or if the market just goes quiet. Most people are going to leave. And we're already seeing that with trading volumes on exchanges. The volumes have dropped off, which guarantees you that many people have left. They've stopped talking about it. Maybe they bought what they wanted to buy and they're just going to sit on it now, or they got scared and they've just left because they didn't make profit the next day. That has happened already because the volumes on exchanges has died off since that peak when Cathie Wood came out to us telling us that Bitcoin was going to be $1 million before 2030 after she'd only recently said it was going to be $1 million at 2030 just a few weeks earlier. Now we have one more halving to look at, and this is back in 2012. You can see the halving happened here in November this time around. There was a significant correction that occurred in August, so basically 3 months earlier. And then the most recent correction into that halving was about 25%. So this particular correction could have flushed out a lot of the weak hands, a lot of the sellers that just wanted to get out of the market after a pretty significant move to the upside. It went from about $5 up to 15, so it tripled in a matter of weeks, similar to what we've seen over the last several months rather than weeks, going from 25K to nearly 75K. But essentially leading into that halving, the price stabilized. You could see a lot of the participants left again because of the range of the bars got very, very small. And then the halving takes place. A few weeks after that, the market started to break some highs. And then eventually, a few weeks later, again, it broke through that previous peak. So looking at these ranges here in time, from the peak to the breakout was about 15 weeks. Now, if I take this and bring it back to the halving, you had about 6 weeks into the halving from that peak, which is very similar to what's happening at the moment. Now, of course, this is not a new all-time high, but you can see it running very hard into those price ranges. And then again, it ran very hard after the halving as well. So I'm very bullish on the market after this point, considering where we sit in the cycle and where the pattern sits. However, we just have to pay attention. We've got to keep an open mind here that maybe there's going to be several weeks of prices underneath the old all-time high leading into the halving and potentially a few more weeks after that point. We don't know yet, and we'll get some more clues once we see where the swings, the weekly swings come into play. So that leads us back to the present day. So far we have higher lows, but lower highs forming on the weekly. We're about 5.5 weeks out from the peak to the halving, or that, this entire range of the Bitcoin price at the moment. So there's a couple more weeks left to go into the halving. What I gather from the data that we've had a look at in the last 3 halvings, now into our 4th one here, should we see the weekly swing breakdown, that would potentially mean that we would have more time underneath the old all-time high. The flip side to that is good times to be continuing to get in, provided, yep, there's got to be a disclaimer, providing we do not go below this zone here. This was the ETF zone, the big hype up out of the breakout of $30,000. So the top there is roughly 49,000, and you've got a few 50% levels through the middle and in the mid to low 40s as well. So for a nice easy round number, you don't want to see any closes below $48,000. No weekly, no monthly closes below $48,000. I already hear it at the other end, folks saying it's impossible. It's going to be a 35% drop. Nothing is impossible in this game. And all I'm saying is just keep an open mind. That's it. Trying to talk about keeping an open mind back on the week of the 11th of March, no chance. No one had an open mind there. It was on for 100K and only 100K. You can see it with the titles of the videos. I was getting a little bit too bearish for the likes of many people just a few weeks ago, and they did not like that at all. But look at where we are now. Doesn't mean we've broken down, but we have gone sideways now for the longest period of time since the lead up to the ETF. We've been sideways here now for 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks with a slightly higher high here going into a new all-time high, and now a swing bottom. Finally, we have got a swing bottom since January. So it's basically 2 months with no swing bottom, just straight up. So all I'm saying is just keep an open mind while the data is either inconclusive or it's not as bullish as it was in the short term. We've seen plenty of things play out here in the short term with a breakdown of the swing. We're underneath significant 50% levels at the moment. Of course, these can flip on a dime here, but in terms of the short-term bullishness, if this is to be a low, Bitcoin needs to get back above that low, and that low on the index here is 68,337. So moving up for a little more strength, at least 68,500, and of course the previous old all-time high is 69,000. Those numbers are going to be very, very important over the coming days. If you see this price run up and get rejected, it's probably likely that we're going to see this low break. So that is something to pay very close attention to over the next few days. We have 16 days leading into this halving. Bitcoin has the potential to give us much better buying opportunities for Bitcoin and for cryptocurrencies, looking at those strong ones, which I'll also get to in just a moment. But in the short term, that's what you want to look at. Something nice and quick there for you. Check $68,500 and see how the market reacts from that point over the next several days. In the short term, the chart is suggesting that it needed a cool off. There was ridiculous stuff going on in March. You had Drake posting about Michael Saylor's Bitcoin positions. That happened at the peak. Ridiculous. Cathie Wood talking about $1 million Bitcoins. As I've said many, many times before, it's the same crap that happens every single cycle. There's a reminder, hit the like button. It's just something that this iMovie thing does. All right. So in terms of the support levels, the macro support levels, we zoom out, nothing looks so bad anymore. Just zoom out here. We've got plenty of support levels. The monthly close, 61,400, which lines up with the previous low that we saw just a couple of weeks ago. Further, we have the quarterly close that happens back in 2021. So the highest quarterly close prior to the current quarterly close. So I'm still keeping an eye on that because we haven't seen another push through for this next quarter coming up. We still have another 3 months. That price comes in at 58,800. Now, plenty of space to go down there for the weekly, 52K and 48K. So we don't need to get worried about that so far. We have a macro 50% that comes in at 44. And in terms of the 50% level for this entire range, the straight up range for the weekly comes in at 56. So essentially, there is a lot of support to the downside, almost every $2,000 to the downside. Now, if we look at it in terms of percentages, current low is at 17.5%. What we've seen over the entirety of this bull market is 20 to 22%. So just taking a quick measure here, going back to the quarterly close at basically 59K, that would be at 20%. To the halfway point of this entire run up, so very significant level there at 56K, that would give you 24%. So something slightly larger than what we've currently seen. Nothing out of the ordinary. Now, if it was to go any further than that, we've got all the way back down to 52K, which is that weekly pivot point. That would take the correction down to 30%. So still a pretty normal correction there for Bitcoin, and it would still remain in a macro bull market. But it would definitely flush out a lot of the weak hands that have basically bought up in this entire February, March period, where the price went ballistic over a very short period of time. Now to the final one here, 35%. So I think anything under this level, if we got multiple weekly closes or a monthly close underneath roughly around that mid 40s to 48K, that is going to send some shockwaves through Bitcoin. That's when we got to start getting a little bit worried about where this market goes to from here. I don't think that's going to happen just based on what we currently have. I think we're probably somewhere in the vicinity here in those sort of mid to high 50s. I've already seen a low here at 60.7. Let's wait and see how the next few days react to try and get back above that 68.5K level. So in the short term, 68.5K is the level for Bitcoin to get above. If not, maybe there's some downside here. but it's not the end of the world. And I think it's going to be great news for the next accumulation phase for altcoins. Total cryptocurrency market cap, excluding Bitcoin, ETH, and the stable coins, exclusive to TIA indicators here. Link to that is in top of the video description. Nonetheless, let's have a look at some of these corrections here. Out of the low, when we got this first big move up, it was about 9 weeks to the low and then 13 weeks to the high low, which then took off from that point. So we're trying to figure out a time frame to enter your positions of your favorite degenerate AI gaming meme coins that you want to make your millions on, right? So just looking at the accumulation time frames, 9 to 13, 7 weeks to the downside here, 4 weeks to the downside here. And so far we have 1 week to the low, but we've been underneath the old high here for the last 3 weeks. So if we're to get another low point come this week or next week, that would set us up something like this. So around 4 to 5 weeks. The previous cycle, that's again what happened. It had 5 weeks down. Then you had some sideways weeks here, so it's a bit more of accumulation, which roughly made it out to about 14 weeks before it took off, broke the top. And then you had another 4-week correction before it made it through the tipping point, and then went on that second final mega run to the peak and breaking out of the new all-time high. So far, the total cryptocurrency market cap has not taken out the tipping point. We're currently at a rejection here, and we haven't taken out the new all-time high. So if this is still a macro bull market, and we haven't seen anything to suggest that it's not, well, then we still have further upside to go just based on history. A breakout of the tipping point would cause more speculators to come into the market, more money, more upside, faster gains, which is the riskier part of the trade now. As you get closer to these peaks, that's when things get much, much more risky. And in terms of timing here, to get to that new all-time high, it seems like things are again speeding up to get there. To get to the new all-time high last cycle, it took 114 weeks. Now, I'm measuring it from the May low here, not the cycle low at December, just so we can get an idea of the speed here. If we're to do the same time frame from this very significant low when the CeFi and DeFi collapsed, that would bring us out to August of 2024. I think most had anticipated that we're going to be there sooner now that we've seen this big run up. But if that's the case, well, then there's still sort of 4 to 5 months until we reach this new all-time high. But the tipping point could come sooner. So we could break the tipping point, take a few more weeks there, and then break to that new all-time high. So just measuring similar things to the last cycle is only one data point. So the main thing I want to look at here is just these accumulation phases on the way up to breaking the tipping point and breaking to a new all-time high. Because once we break the tipping point, it gets much, much more risky. Sorry to say, it's going to be the fun times. Everyone's going to be telling you about $1 million Bitcoin and all this sort of crap here, but it is the much more risky time as we head into those new all-time highs. So be sure to find yourself those strong cryptocurrencies which are holding up while Bitcoin is trending sideways, while it might correct. Solana, of course, is a massive crowd favorite. It's still holding up at these high levels. It's broken past the 50% level. Against the Bitcoin value, it's still holding up very, very well. Whereas you can see some of these other altcoins like Injective, that has just been down, down, down. Casper, that has just been down for ages. I can bring up a lot of these other cryptos, TIA, Celestia, that has just been down, down, down. And of course, you don't want me to go to XRP. That thing has been down for 6 years and they keep calling it a consolidation period. So what you want to do is find cryptos that are strong against their Bitcoin value, which is not a guarantee, but it's going to swing the probabilities in your favor that you're going to see cryptos, you're going to see gains on those cryptos exceed what Bitcoin is doing. This is not a great sign if it is getting weak against Bitcoin for a very long period of time. Some will call it an accumulation. Don't be fooled. If it breaks significant levels, it's probably not likely going to do big things. And you want altcoins that are going to do big things. Stay tuned to the channel, hit the like and subscribe button. Big things coming up here, along with our sale in the next 2 days. Until next time, take care and peace out.